They didn't put on the rags to beg for bread. Farron and Sabela Vasari had run a harbor city for 30 years, and they had learned long ago that the truth never shows its face to people in good coats. So 2 nights before their only son bound the family name to a stranger, they dressed themselves in filth and knelt in a wet alley to watch her when she believed no one important was looking. They came, certain they would catch a liar wearing a kind face. What that woman did with the last coin in her pocket did not just take apart every suspicion they had carried down the hill. It made their son cancel the wedding and put a gun back in an old man's hand that was still to come. It began at a dinner table. None of them would ever sit at the same way again. The dining room on Ashcombe Hill was built to swallow sound. 40 feet of black walnut, a ceiling that climbed up into shadow, tall windows sealed against more than the weather. Farron Vasari had eaten at the head of that table since before his son could walk, and tonight, for the first time in a long while, he was not the one sitting there. His son was. Corin Vasari had inherited his father's stillness and none of his patience. He was 31, and he ran the docks the way other men run their own breathing, without effort, without ever quite stopping. He wore charcoal and no tie. A glass of red sat, untouched, at his right hand. He waited until the last of the house staff had drawn the doors shut before he told his parents the thing he had summoned them to hear. I'm getting married. I wanted it to come from me, before it came from anyone else. The clock in the corner kept its count. Sabela set down her fork with the softest click of silver on porcelain. Farron did not move at all, which was its own kind of answer. His son had learned to read that stillness before he could read letters. To whom? Farron said. It was not a question. It was a door being opened, one careful inch. Her name is Myrila Sarn. Corin's voice did not change, but something behind his eyes did, and both of his parents saw it, and neither of them liked what it meant. She lives down on Marrow Row. She works, she keeps to herself. You haven't met her because I wanted her kept away from all of this for as long as I could manage it. Marrow Row. Sabela repeated the name the way you repeat the name of a disease. Corin. There is nothing on Marrow Row but people the city forgot on purpose. Who is her family? Who vouches for her? Who do we know that knows her? No one. He said it like a man who had already decided the answer did not matter. She came out of nowhere 8 months ago, and she has never once asked me for a thing. Not money, not a name, not protection. Do you understand how rare that is in our world? A person who wants nothing from me? A person who wants nothing, Farron said quietly, is a person who is very good at hiding what they want. The words landed the way old truths do, heavily, and without needing to be loud. Corin's jaw tightened. He had come up under this man. He knew that voice, and he knew that 30 years of it had never been wrong about a threat. That was precisely why he refused to hear it tonight. I didn't come to ask permission, Corin said. I came to give you the courtesy of knowing. Damek Roslav has been pushing at our northern warehouses for a year. Half the families on the water think I've gone soft because I haven't answered him yet. Saturday, I answer everything. I put my house in order. I marry the one honest person left in my life. And then I deal with Roslav on my own terms. He stood, and the chair legs whispered against the parquet. She is not a threat to this family. She's the only thing in it I actually trust. He kissed his mother's cheek, gripped his father's shoulder once, the old signal of respect, the one thing about him that had never changed, and left them alone in a room built to swallow sound. For a long moment neither of the old people spoke. The candles held perfectly still in their sealed air. Then Sabela turned to her husband, and her voice had lost every trace of the dinner table softness. He's in love. God help us, Farron. He is actually in love. A man like our son does not fall in love with a stranger from Marrow Row for no reason. Either she is exactly what she says she is, or she is the most dangerous thing that has ever come near this house. She pressed her ringed fingers flat against the table. And in 30 years I have never gambled the family on a maybe. Ferran looked at the door his son had closed behind him. When he finally answered, he sounded less like a father and more like the man the whole harbor had learned to fear. Then we don't send anyone to look at her. Men lie. To men like us, she'll show a soldier a saint's face and send him home with a saint's report. He turned to his wife. And in the candlelight, the old Don's eyes were very cold and very clear. We go ourselves. We go as no one. And we find out who she really is before Saturday puts her name over our door, before the ink dries, and it's too late to undo. Sabela Vasari had been the daughter of a fishmonger before she was the wife of a Don, and she had never forgotten how the two halves of a city look at each other. The rich look through the poor. The poor look at everyone, because looking is how the poor stay alive. That single fact was the whole of her plan, and she explained it to her husband the next morning in the one room on Ashcombe Hill, without windows. If we send a car, she performs, Sabela said. If we send a man, she performs. But no one performs for a beggar, Ferran. No one bothers to lie to someone they think can't hurt them. You want to see the real face of Mirela Sarn. Then we have to become the kind of people she has no reason to lie to. They had every reason to fear the answer. Ferran laid the reasons out on the table like cards, and each one was uglier than the last. In 8 months, no one on the water had learned a single verifiable fact about the girl's past. Not a hometown, not a maiden aunt, not a school. Twice, Cale, their son's most loyal man, had seen her walking the northern edge of the docks, after dark, alone, in the exact stretch of shoreline where Damek Roslov's people moved their cargo. She accepted his gifts, and yet not one of them ever showed on her. No jewelry, no car, no sign anywhere of the fortune he lavished on her, as though the money simply vanished the moment it touched her hands. Either impossible virtue or a careful operative keeping herself untraceable. And when Corin had once, gently, asked about her father, she had smiled and changed the subject so smoothly that the man had not even noticed he'd been steered. A woman with no past, walking Roslov's beach at night, taking nothing she can be traced by, Ferran said. Tell me that isn't the profile of a plant. Tell me Roslov didn't build her in a workshop and aim her at my son's heart because he knew a bullet would never get close enough. I can't tell you that, Sabela said. That's why we go. And, if it's true? Ferran pressed, because he had spent a lifetime saying the ugly thing out loud, so it could not ambush him later. If we go down there, and we find out that the woman our son wants to marry on Saturday is Damek Roslov's knife, what then? You know what that costs, you know who has to pay it, and you know it won't be a stranger doing the paying. Sabela was quiet for a long moment. When she answered, her voice was steady, but her hands had gone still on the table. Then we will have found out in time. That is the only mercy our life allows, Ferran. Not that the news is ever good, only that it comes before the funeral instead of after it. They did not do it carelessly. Sabela pulled 2 sets of clothes from a bag Kyle had bought that afternoon, in a part of the city no Vasari had walked in years. A man's coat worn through at both elbows, a woman's shawl the color of dishwater, shoes with the soles half gone. She rubbed ash from the cold hearth into the creases of her husband's knuckles and along his jaw, and she took the rings from her own fingers, one by one, and locked them in the safe. And when she was done, she looked at herself in the mirror and saw, for one disorienting moment. Ferran watched her transform and felt something he had not felt in decades, exposed. For 30 years the name Vasari had been a wall around him. Tonight, he would walk out from behind it on purpose. If anyone recognizes us down there, he said, we won't get a second chance, and we won't get a car. Then don't be Ferran Vasari, his wife said, tucking a strand of gray under the shawl. Be a tired old man whose knees hurt. You've had practice. They went down off the hill on foot. At dusk, when the light does the poor, the small mercy of hiding them. The harbor city changed around them, with every block, the way it always did, and the way neither of them had let themselves see in years. The clean stone gave way to cracked concrete. The street lamps thinned and then failed altogether. The smell of the water turned from salt to rot. By the time they reached the mouth of Marrow Row, a fine, cold rain had begun to fall, and the two most feared people in the city stood in it, like what they were pretending to be, two old bodies with nowhere warmer to go. Marrow Row was a single, long throat of a street, tenements leaning on tenements, a soup line already forming outside a shuttered church at its far end. Ferran and Sabella lowered themselves onto an overturned crate in the shelter of an awning and did the hardest thing either of them had done in years. They waited. They watched. They let the city look through them. And then, out of the gray curtain of rain at the top of the row, a figure came walking straight toward them, unhurried, hood down in the wet, as though she had long ago stopped minding it. And Sabella's breath caught in her throat, because even from 30 feet away, even soaked and plain and carrying two heavy bags, there was no mistaking that this was the woman they had come to destroy. She was younger than Sabella had let herself imagine, and plainer, and that was the first thing that was wrong. A woman built to seduce an empire out of a lonely man does not come to a slum in a soaked wool coat with her hair stuck to her face and two grocery bags cutting red lines into her fingers. Myrela Sarn walked down the middle of Marrow Row like she had walked it 1,000 times, and the people in the soup line did not go quiet and wary the way people do around a stranger. They lifted their heads. A child broke from the line and ran to her, and she shifted both bags to one hand without breaking stride to touch the top of his head. "She lives here," Farron murmured. So low the rain nearly took it. "She actually lives here." "Or she wants us to think so," Sabella answered, but the words came out with less iron than she intended. Myrella reached the shuttered church and set the bags down on the step, and only then did she see them. The two old people huddled under the awning across the street, watching her with the flat, hungry patience of the truly cold. She looked at them the way most people never look at the poor, directly, for a full second, seeing them. Then she picked her bags back up and crossed the row toward them through the rain, and Ferran felt his wife go rigid beside him, and he slid one ash-blackened hand a half-inch toward the knife he had not told her he was carrying. "You've been out here a while," Myrella said. Poor. It wasn't a question either. She crouched down in front of them, heedless of the wet soaking through her knees, and set one bag on the ground between them. "There's a bed at the shelter on Ash Lane, but it fills by nightfall, and it's well past that now." So, she was already unpacking as she spoke. A heel of bread, a wedge of hard cheese, a battered thermos. "Don't drink it too fast. It'll turn your stomach if you drink it too fast." Sabella stared at the thermos being pressed into her hands and could not, for a moment, make herself speak. This was the part where the performance was supposed to show its seams. She waited for the girl to angle, for something, to preach, to be seen being kind. Myrella did none of it. She poured the broth herself because Sabella's hands were shaking, and she frowned at the sound of the old woman's cough, and she pulled her own scarf dry, the only dry thing on her, from inside her coat, and looped it twice around Sabella's throat before the old woman could refuse. "That cough is going to your chest," Myrella said. "Keep it covered. I mean it. You'll be cold," Sabella heard herself say. It was not a line from any plan. "I'm always cold. One more scarf won't fix me." Something almost like humor crossed the girl's tired face, and then it was gone, and she was digging in her coat pocket. She came out with a small handful of coins, counted them once by feel without looking, and folded all but one into Ferran's palm, closing his blackened old fingers around the money. The way you'd close a book. She kept the last coin back. Ferran watched her look at it, this single coin, the last thing between her and empty, and he watched her hesitate for exactly as long as it takes an honest person to be honest. And then she reached past him and dropped it into the tin cup of the man sleeping in the next doorway, who had asked her for nothing, who would never know it was her. She gave a stranger her last coin, while two more strangers watched. And she did it when she thought it cost her nothing but the coin. Farhan Vasari had spent his life learning to tell a real thing from a staged one. He knew, sitting on that crate with a dead man's shoes on his feet, that he had just watched a real thing. He did not want to know it. It undid something he had come down the hill absolutely sure of. Marilla gathered her empty bag and stood, wincing as her knees took her weight, and for just a moment she swayed there over them, and both old people saw how thin she truly was under the bulk of the wet coat. Thin the way people get when the food they carry is always for somebody else. She looked down the length of Marrow Row, toward the black edge of the water, and when she spoke again her voice had dropped, and the easy warmth had gone out of it, replaced by something taut. Listen to me, both of you. She crouched again, closer now, urgent. Don't stay out on the road tonight, not tonight. Take the food, take the scarf, and get yourselves behind a locked door before full dark, the shelter, the church basement, anywhere with a bolt. If a man in a gray coat comes down this street asking whether anyone's seen anything, you didn't. You've been asleep. You understand me? You've been asleep all night. Sabella's mouth had gone dry. Child, what's coming down the street tonight? Myrella's eyes flicked once toward the water, and something crossed them that Sabella recognized instantly, because she had lived 30 years beside it in her own husband's face. It was not fear for herself, nothing that wants anything to do with two people. No one would miss, Myrella said softly. Which is exactly why I need you gone. Please. And with that she rose, hauled her empty bags up onto her shoulder, and walked back out into the rain toward the black mouth of the docks, the very shoreline where Damek Roslav moved his cargo in the dark, leaving Ferran and Sabella Vasari alone under the awning with a stranger's warm broth in their hands and the slow, sick understanding that nothing they had believed on the hill was going to survive the walk back up it. They did not go back up the hill that night. Sabella told herself it was because of the rain and her husband's knees. But the truth was simpler and worse. Neither of them could unsee the coin. They took the girl's advice instead, and spent the dark hours behind the bolted door of the church basement, among the coughing and the snoring of Marrow Row. And in the morning, they did the thing they had come to do. They watched Mirella Sarn live her life when she thought no one was keeping score. It was not the life of a woman hunting an empire. Before the sun was properly up, she was at the cannery on the water's edge, and Ferran, drifting past the loading door in his ruined coat, watched her gutfish for 6 hours without once lifting her head. At midday, she did not eat. At the break, she carried her untouched bread out to the alley and split it between two children who were not hers. In the afternoon, she moved from the cannery straight to the shuttered church and ran the soup line she had stood in the night before, on the other side of the pot now, ladle in hand, learning names, remembering them. Once a man near the front of the line, old, palsied, long past pride, knocked his whole bowl into the mud with a shaking hand and stood staring down at it like a child who knows there will not be any more. Myrella did not hesitate and did not announce it. She filled her own bowl, the one she had set aside for herself, and put it into his hands, and steered him gently to the wall to eat it, and went back to the pot as though nothing had happened. No one applauded, because no one but the Visaris was watching for it. Sabella felt her husband go very still beside her, and knew he had seen it too, and knew that neither of them was going to say a word about it. "Where is it going?" Ferran murmured to his wife. The two of them huddled at the tail of the line like everyone else. "Corin gives that girl more in a month than this whole street sees in a year. Look at her hands. Look at her shoes. She's wearing my son's fortune, and none of it is on her back." They found the answer, or thought they did, when they followed her home. Home was a single room over a bait shop, and through the gap in a curtain that didn't quite close, they saw all of it at once: a cot, a chair, a hot plate, a wall of neatly stacked papers, and nothing else. No comfort. No jewelry catching the light, no sign anywhere of the money Corin poured into her, as if she took each gift he gave and fed it straight into a fire only she could see. It was the wall of papers that Ferran could not stop looking at. Even through the narrow gap in the curtain, he could tell it was no ordinary clutter. The sheets were sorted, pinned, cross-marked, some fixed edge to edge, like a map being assembled a piece at a time. A woman with a cot and a hot plate and nothing else in the world had built herself a wall of something, and had covered her one window against the street, and Ferran filed the sight away without understanding it. The way you catch a single wrong note in a song, and cannot place it until the whole thing is over. A plant strips her own nest, Ferran said, but he did not sound certain anymore, and Sabela heard it. Or, a woman is drowning, his wife answered, and hasn't told anyone she can't swim. You've decided then? It came out sharper than he meant. One bowl of broth, and a borrowed scarf, and 30 years of instinct go out the window. I haven't decided anything. Sabela's jaw was tight. I'm telling you what my eyes are telling me, and my eyes were reading people on this water while you were still a runner. That is not a woman playing a part. A part slips the moment no one is clapping. Hers doesn't slip. It never once slips. She pulled the borrowed shawl tighter around her throat, and that frightens me more than a plant would. Because if she isn't lying to us, then the real danger in this city was never the girl at all. It's whatever she is so afraid of that she'd rather live down here in the dark than let it find her. Then night came, and the doubt Ferran had been nursing hardened back into suspicion, because Mirella did the one thing an innocent woman on Marrow Row had no reason to do. She waited until the row was dark and quiet, pulled her hood up, and slipped out toward the water, toward the black northern shoreline, where Roslav's boats came and went in the dark, and no honest soul walked after nightfall. The old couple followed at a distance. Their whole marriage had taught them to keep. They watched her leave the last of the streetlight behind. They watched her stop in the lee of a dead crane, where a lean man in a canvas coat was already waiting, a man who moved like someone who did not want to be seen moving. And they watched Mirella reach into her coat and hand him a thick fold of banknotes, more cash than a cannery worker holds in a season, and take, in return, something small enough to close inside one fist. They were too far to catch a single word of it. But they saw the man never count the money. He didn't so much as thumb the edge of the fold, which meant he already trusted her, which meant this was not the first time. And they saw him glance over both his shoulders before he passed her, the small thing. And they saw Mirella slide it against her body, beneath her coat, and hold it there with both crossed arms as though it were worth a great deal more than her own life. To anyone else, it would have meant nothing. To two people who had spent 30 years reading exactly this kind of shadow, it was unmistakable. It was a drop. It was a plant paying her handler, or buying what only Roslav's people had to sell. Ferran's face went to stone. Every soft thing the day had put into him drained out in a breath, and the dawn came back up behind his eyes like water, filling a print in the sand. There, he whispered, and there was something almost like grief in it, and something a great deal harder underneath. There it is. We were right, Sabela. God forgive me, we were right. His hand found his wife's wrist in the dark. Follow her, wherever she goes now. We follow her, and we don't lose her. They followed her along the waterline, keeping to the black between the cranes, and the closer they got, the less the picture held together. Because Mirella was not behaving like someone who had just been paid, she was behaving like someone who had just bought a live grenade. She had the small thing pressed flat against her chest, under her coat, both arms crossed over it, and she was moving fast and low and checking her back, not the casual glance of a woman worried about a mugger, but the tight, methodical sweep of someone who knew for a fact that she was being hunted. Twice she stopped dead and pressed into a doorway and waited, and both times Ferran and Sabela had to freeze in the dark and hold their breath, and both times what she was hiding from was real. Men were moving on that shoreline tonight, more than the one she'd met. Ferran counted them the way he had been taught to count threats before they became bodies. A shape peeling off a container stacked to the left, another crouched low against the seawall, a third somewhere behind. that he could feel more than see. He put his mouth to his wife's ear. "This isn't a meeting anymore," he breathed. "Somebody set a trap on this beach, and she's walking straight into the mouth of it, and she has no idea how many they are." For one terrible moment, the old Don's discipline warred with something older and less careful, and he very nearly stepped out of the dark to shout a warning at a girl he had come down the hill to destroy, and then it was too late for warnings. There was a boy with her, too. Ferran saw him first, the same small child who had run to her on the row, no more than 9, tucked up on a stack of pallets near the mouth of the alley. She was making for a lookout. She had posted a 9-year-old as a lookout, which was either the coldest thing a handler could do, or the act of a woman with no one else left in the world to trust. Then the boy whistled, one sharp, frightened note, and everything happened at once. 3 men came out of the shipping containers at a dead run, and they did not come like muggers. They came like professionals, closing a net, spreading wide, to cut off the alley's mouth, and the lead one had a blade already low in his hand. Myrilla did not run for herself. That was the thing that broke the last of Ferran's certainty, as he watched it. She ran the wrong way, back toward the pallets, toward the boy, and she got a fistful of the child's collar and threw him bodily into the gap between 2 containers, into the dark, out of reach, screaming one word at him: "Run." It cost her the half-second she needed. The lead man was on her before she turned. She got an arm up, and the blade meant for her throat opened her forearm instead, and then a second cut caught her low across the ribs as she twisted, and she went down against the containers with the small thing still crushed to her chest, refusing, even folding to the ground, to let go of it. Ferran Vasari had promised his wife he would not move. He moved. 30 years and a beggar's rags fell off him in a single stride. The knife he had never told Sabela he was carrying was in his hand, and then it was in the shoulder of the nearest man, and the old Don put a boot into the back of the man's knee and dropped him, screaming, and roared something wordless and huge into the dark, the voice of somebody who was very obviously not a beggar. A voice that carried authority like a weapon. The 2 men still standing did not know what had just come out of the shadows at them. They knew only that it was large and armed and unafraid, and that lights were coming on now in the tenements, and that whatever they had been sent to collect was not worth dying over tonight. They grabbed their bleeding friend and they ran. Then it was just the 4 of them, in the sudden ringing quiet, the old man breathing hard over a dropped knife, his wife already scrambling out of the dark toward the girl, the boy's footsteps fading safely away, and Marilla Sarn folding slowly sideways onto the wet stone in a spreading black stain. Sabela reached her first and got a hand under her head. The girl's eyes were open and swimming, fever-bright with shock, and they found Sabela's face, and this was the part Sabela would carry to her grave. They softened. Even now. Even here. She looked up into the face of the beggar woman. She'd fed a scarf and a bowl of broth, and what came over her ruined face was not fear. It was relief. As if the one lucky thing in a very bad night was that it was these hands and not some strangers. Sabela had spent a lifetime being feared, being deferred to, being obeyed across a table by men who would sooner die than contradict her. She had forgotten, until that moment on the wet stone, what it was to be simply trusted by someone who had nothing left to give and no reason on earth to give it. And it went into her the way the blade had gone into the girl, clean and deep, and impossible to draw back out. "You," Myrilla breathed. "Good. It has to be someone no one would ever think to search." "Don't talk," Sabela said, pressing her own shawl against the wound at the girl's ribs. "Save it, child, save your strength." But Myrilla was already dragging the whole bundle out from inside her coat, and now they could both see what she had bled a fortune and weeks of her life to assemble. A phone, cheap and scratched, and a fold of photographs. She caught Sabela's wrist with a strength that had no business being in a body bleeding that fast, and pressed all of it into the old woman's hands, and closed the old woman's fingers around it exactly the way she had closed Ferran's around her coins the night before. "Corin Vasari," she said, and the name went through both old people like a current. "Only him. Not his men. Only him. You put this in his hands and nobody else's. Tell him." Her breath tore. Her grip was already loosening. "Tell him it's Vico. It was always Vico." The name hit Farron like a fist to the chest. Vico. Not a Roslav man, not a stranger, not some bought dockhand. Vico, who had eaten at their table since he was 12 years old, who had wept on Ferran's shoulder at his own father's funeral, who called Corinne brother and had, Ferran would have sworn on his own life, meant it. Sabella's hand flew to her mouth, and still the girl kept talking, spending breath she did not have to spend, because getting the warning out of her body mattered to her more than keeping the blood in it. "He's selling him to Roslav, and he does it Saturday, at the wedding, when Corin's unarmed in front of everyone he loves. Please, please, he won't believe it from anyone, but he has to see the proof. He has to." Her eyes rolled. Her hand slid off Sabella's wrist and struck the stone. And Ferran Vasari stood over the body of the girl he had come to expose, holding a bloody knife in a dead man's coat, and heard his own most trusted lie collapse, because the woman he'd been so certain was Damek Roslav's knife had just spent her last blood trying to put a knife out of his son's back, and had named the traitor, and the traitor was not her. The traitor was family. She was not dead. Sabella had gutted enough fish as a girl to know the difference between a wound that kills fast and one that only wants to, and this one, deep, ugly, but high on the ribs, only wanted to. "Help me lift her," she snapped at her husband, in a voice he had not heard from her since their son was small and burning with fever, and the two of them carried Morella back off the shoreline and down into the bolted church basement where the poor of Marrow Row slept, and there, by the light of a single caged bulb, Sabella went to work with clean rags and boiled water, and the steady hands of a woman who had grown up where doctors did not come. It was while she was cutting the blood-soaked collar away from the wound that she found it. A cord around the girl's neck, and on the cord, warm from her skin, a coin, not currency. Heavier than currency, older, struck with a crest, Sabella Vasari had slept beneath for 40 years, the twin herons of the Vasari house, and worn smooth on one face from a lifetime of being touched. Sabella's own fingers went cold as she turned it over, already knowing, dreading the knowing. On the reverse, cut by hand into the metal, 2 letters. DS. The basement tilted around her. She heard herself make a sound she didn't recognize. Farron. She could barely get his name out. "Farron, come here and look at this and tell me I've lost my mind." He came, and he took the coin between 2 fingers that had killed men without shaking, and those fingers shook now. He knew the coin. He had commissioned 40 of them, one for each man of his personal guard in the worst year of the old war, each struck with the herons and each carved on the back with its owner's initials, given by his own hand as a promise. "You bleed for me, and this house bleeds for you, forever." He knew whose initials these were. He had knelt in the rain 15 years ago on Kettle Street with the man who owned this coin dying in his arms, a quiet soldier named Doran Sarn, who had seen the blade, meant for his dawn a half-second, before anyone else, and had stepped into it without a word, the way you'd step in front of a car to push a child clear. Farron had held the wound shut with both hands, and it had made no difference at all. Sarn had looked up at him, not afraid, never once afraid, and used the last clear breath in his body to ask whether the Don had been hurt. "Are you hit, Voss?" Those were the words. A blade, buried in his own chest, and his only question was whether it had reached the man he had sworn to keep alive. Farron had promised him, kneeling there in the rain, that his family would never want for anything as long as a Vasari drew breath. He had meant it the way a man means things over someone who is dying. And then the war had gone on the way wars do, and the men Farron had trusted to keep such promises had died or turned or simply forgotten. And somewhere in all of it, a widow and a little girl had slipped clean through the floor of the world and down into Marrow Row, and no one had ever thought to tell the Dawn. Had never thought to ask. Doran Sarn, who had a wife? Who had? Ferran remembered now, with the force of a physical blow, a little girl. We paid the widow, Ferran said hoarsely. To no one, to the caged bulb, to 15 years of not looking. We paid her once, and then the war swallowed everything. And we lost them. We let Doran Sarn's family fall down here, into this. He looked around the basement, at the coughing shapes, at the rot, and his voice broke on the next words. His daughter grew up in this while we ate off silver on the hill, and she never came to us. She never came to collect what this house owed her father's blood. On the cot, Myrella stirred. Her eyes cracked open, found the coin in the old Dawn's hand, and a weak, wretched understanding moved across her face, the look of someone whose last secret has slipped out while she slept. You weren't supposed to see that, she whispered. Sabela was on her knees beside her at once. Child, child, your father was Doran Sarn. My father, Myrella said, and even ruined, even gray, there was steel in it, was a good man who died for a promise, and I was not going to let his daughter be a promise anybody had to keep. Her throat worked. That's why I never told Corin who I was. Don't you understand? The day he finds out my father took a blade for his father, I stop being the woman he chose. I become a debt. He marries me to settle an account. I would rather live in a room over a bait shop for the rest of my life than be paid off with a wedding ring. It was the most either of them had ever heard a living soul say about the true cost of the Vasari name, and it had come from the one person in the whole city with the most right to collect on it, and the very least willingness to. The two old people looked at each other over her, and neither could speak. And Vico, Ferran finally managed. Corin's Vico. The boy I half-raised in my own house. You're certain? I've been certain for 5 weeks. She let her head fall back, exhausted, past pretending. I found it by accident, a manifest that shouldn't have existed. Vico's cargo moving through Roslav's docks. After that, I couldn't stop pulling the thread. Everything Corin ever gave me, I sold. The jewelry, the accounts, all of it. I turned it into cash and I bought pieces of the truth from anyone on this water, desperate enough to sell, because I'm nobody. Don't you see? I'm an outsider from Marrow Row, accusing Corin's own blood of treason. If I'd gone to him with a story and no proof, he'd have thought I was jealous, or planted, or mad, and Vico would have known within the hour, and then Vico kills us both before Saturday instead of at it. Her eyes closed. I only needed 1 more week. I almost had all of it. You have all of it, Sabela said fiercely, and pressed the phone and the drive and the photographs back into the girl's own bandaged hand for 1 second, so she'd feel it, so she'd know. You did it. It's done. You hear me? It's done. Myrila's good hand closed around the evidence, and then she tried, God help her, she tried, to sit up, to stand, to go, to carry it up the hill herself, on a leg that would not hold her and a body already half emptied of blood. Then I have to get to him, she said, gray with the effort of the words alone. It has to be me. He'll believe the proof, but he has to hear it from Sabela pressed her back down against the cot with the flat of one hand, gently, the way you would settle a frightened animal. You are not walking anywhere, child. You have carried this alone long enough. Let someone carry it for you. Now. But even as she said it, Ferran was on his feet, and the last of the beggar had gone out of him entirely. Because his wife's word had reminded him of the only thing that still mattered in that basement, the thing hanging over all of them like a raised blade. Saturday. He pulled a phone from inside the ruined coat, his own, the real one, and checked it, and his face when he looked up made Sabela's stomach drop. The wedding is in 9 hours, Ferran Vasari said. And his voice was no longer an old man's at all. Vico will be standing at our son's right shoulder, smiling, in 9 hours. And Corin has no idea he's already been sold. He looked down at Doran Sarn's daughter, bleeding on a cot for a family that had forgotten her, and something settled in the old Don's eyes that had not been there in a very long time. No more crawling in the dark. No more rags. We are going up that hill to our son, and God help Vico when I take this coat off. The gate guard on Ashcombe Hill nearly turned them away. He saw two filthy old people limping up the private drive in the gray before dawn, and his hand was already going to his belt when the old man lifted his head and looked at him and said 4 quiet words in a voice the guard had heard only twice in his life and had prayed never to hear aimed at him. "Open the gate, son." The color left the guard's face. He opened the gate. Inside, the house Ferran and Sabela had left 2 days ago no longer belonged to them. It belonged to Saturday. Every hall was choked with white roses banked against the staircases, white silk swagged from the chandeliers, a string quartet running the same 8 bars over and over in the ballroom, while men on ladders hung a canopy over the spot where, in a matter of hours, Corin Vasari was meant to promise his life away in front of 200 guests. Sabela walked through it with her stranger's shawl still knotted at her throat, and understood, with a mother's cold clarity, that she was walking through the set of her son's murder. Someone had dressed a killing floor in flowers. On a gilt easel by the ballroom doors stood the seating plan, hand-lettered in silver, and Sabela's eye caught the head table before she could stop it. There, inked at her son's right hand, the place of highest honor and closest reach, was a single name: Vico, best man, close enough to hold the ring. Close enough, she understood now with a lurch, to catch Corin's arm if ever he tried to run. She had to look away before her face gave her away to the men on the ladders. They found Corin in his study, already awake, already in a shirt with the collar open, frowning at a seating chart as if it were a problem he could solve. When the door opened and his parents came through it, looking like something dragged out of the harbor, he was on his feet in an instant. "What happened to you? Where have you been?" "Sit down," Ferran said, "and keep your voice level because I am about to tell you something. And Vico is somewhere under this roof, and if your face changes, he will know that you know, and then all of us die today instead of Saturday." Corin did not sit, but he went very still, in the way his father had taught him, and he listened. Ferran told it plainly, the way you break the kind of news that takes a man's legs out from under him. The disguise, Marrow Row, the girl who gave away her last coin, the shoreline, the trap, the blade. And then he set Mireille's ruined phone and the flash drive and the fold of photographs down on the seating chart, on top of the little inked names. And he said, "She bought this with everything you ever gave her, and then she bled in the dark to hand it to 2 beggars she'd never met because she was more afraid of you dying than she was of dying herself. It's Vico, Corin. It has been Vico for months. He's selling you to Damek Roslav, and the price is your wedding day." Corin picked up the photographs. His mother watched her son's face while he went through them, one by one, and she watched the thing happen that she had been dreading the whole climb up the hill. She watched a man she loved learn that a man he loved had already killed him in his heart, and only the logistics remained. Corin's jaw did not move. His hand did not shake. That was the terrible part. He had been raised too well to let it. But something behind his eyes went out, quietly, like a lamp being turned down in a far room. And when he finally spoke, his voice had changed into something colder and older than his years. "He asked to be my best man," Corin said, staring at nothing. "3 weeks ago he got drunk, and he cried, and he asked to stand at my shoulder on the day, and I said yes, and I meant it." He set the photographs down with great care. He wanted to be close enough to be sure. Down the hall, faint over the quartet's endless 8 bars, a door opened and a familiar laugh rolled through the house. Easy, warm, and brotherly. Vico's laugh. Corin's eyes lifted toward the sound, and for one heartbeat the mask nearly slipped, and his mother saw murder move across her son's face and then be folded away, deliberately, the way you fold a knife shut, when it isn't time yet. Footsteps came down the hall toward the study, that easy, unhurried gait Corin would have known anywhere, and for 3 long seconds the handle of the door dipped as though someone meant to come through it. Sabella's hand closed over the evidence on the desk and swept it into the folds of her ruined shawl. Ferrand shifted his weight, casual and lethal, into the line between the door and his son. Then Vico's voice called through the wood, warm and careless. "Corin, the florist asking about the head table? Brother, you decent." And Corin made himself answer in a voice with a smile built into it. "Give me 10 minutes." The footsteps wandered off. No one in the room breathed until they were gone. Corin crossed to the intercom on his desk and pressed it. And when he spoke, his voice was smooth as glass, carrying easily out to whoever was managing the endless white circus of Saturday. "Everyone stop. Send the florists home. Send the quartet home. Cover the canopy." A pause, while somewhere a man asked a stunned question. "You heard me. As of this minute, the wedding is off. There's no wedding. Cancel all of it and get these people out of my house." He let go of the intercom. The music died mid-phrase. In the sudden, brittle silence, Corin Vasari looked at his parents, and for the first time since he was a boy, there was something raw and unguarded in it. "Now," he said, "where is she? Where is Myrilla right now, while we've been standing here talking?" And Farron's stomach dropped, because he understood the question underneath the question. They had left a bleeding woman hidden in a church basement on Marrow Row, and somewhere below the hill, Vico's men were already hunting the one witness who could burn everything down. And she was lying wounded and alone, at the bottom of that hill, with nothing between her and them but a broken basement lock. Corin sent Seal, the one man in the organization whose loyalty predated Vico, whose loyalty Farron would have staked the house on, down the hill with 3 cars and a single instruction: bring her to the North safe house alive, and if anyone is already there, leave none of them standing. Then, Corin broke every rule of caution he had ever lived by, and went himself, because there are some things a man cannot delegate and still call himself a man. They reached the basement first. That was the mercy Corin would be grateful for as long as he lived. That Seal's cars came screaming onto Marrow Row 11 minutes before the 2 quiet men Vico had finally thought to send. And that when Corin came down those stairs into the caged light, Marilla Sarn was still alive to see him do it. She was propped against the cold wall where Sabella had left her, gray and stitched and half-conscious, the evidence still clutched in one bandaged hand, as if she meant to keep protecting it even in her sleep. When she saw who had come through the door, she tried to sit up straighter, tried to arrange her ruined face into something composed, tried, even now, even here, to be the woman who never let him see her struggle. "You canceled the wedding," she rasped. "I could hear the cars. You canceled it. Good. That was the point. Keep him out of a room where you're unarmed, and he's smiling." Corin crossed the filthy floor and went down onto his knees in front of her, in the dirt, in a $5,000 shirt, and did not say a single word for a long moment, because he did not trust his voice. He had ruled a harbor without ever raising it. He had watched men beg and felt nothing. And now he knelt in a church basement, in front of a woman who had been quietly dying to keep him alive, and he found that all his cold command had abandoned him at once. "You sold everything I gave you," he said, finally. "The house on the water, the accounts, your ring. I gave you a ring. Myrella and you. I bought your life with it," she said simply. "It was a good trade. I'd make it again." Corin thought of the ring, a thing he had chosen over a month, a stone he told himself said everything he did not have the words for, and of this woman quietly pawning it in some back room on the water to buy a photograph of the man who wanted him dead. All these months, he had believed he was the one protecting her. He had built his whole private idea of them on it. And the entire time she had been the wall between him and a grave, and had let him go on believing he was the strong one, because she understood that he needed to believe it. That was when Sabella stepped forward and pressed the coin on its worn cord into her son's hand, and closed his fingers around it, the way the girl had once closed hers around a fistful of coins. "There's something she never told you," Sabela said softly. "Something she'd have taken to her grave, rather than let you carry. Turn it over, Corin." He turned it over. He saw the herons of his own house. He saw 2 hand-cut letters. Us. And he did not understand. Until his father said, in a voice gone hoarse, "Doran Sarn." He stepped in front of a blade meant for me, on Kettle Street, the year you turned 16. He died in the rain, asking if I was hurt. Farron looked at the girl on the floor as though seeing a ghost finish a sentence. Started 15 years before. This is his daughter. This is the child we owed everything to, and lost, and left, to rot down here, and she never came to collect. She spent 8 months letting you love her, and never once told you what your family owed her blood. Because I didn't want to be a debt," Myrela whispered, her eyes closing. "I wanted to be a choice. I wanted you to want me, Corin, not the ghost of a man who died for your father. If you'd known, every kind thing you ever did would have been guilt. I couldn't. I would rather have had 8 real months than a whole marriage full of a bill being paid." Corin Vizari looked at the coin in one hand, and the dying woman in front of him, and something in his chest that had been armored since boyhood simply came apart. He pressed the coin back over her heart and held her there, his forehead dropping to touch hers. "You will never be a debt in my house," he said very low, very steady. "You are the only clean thing that ever walked into my life, and I am going to spend it making the man who did this to you wish his father had never met his mother." Myrela's eyes were sinking shut again, the little strength she'd hoarded for his arrival finally spent. "Don't," she managed. "Don't make it about me. Make it about surviving. Vico doesn't lose his nerve when he's cornered, he gets faster. If he even suspects the wedding was cancelled, because you know he won't run, he'll move the whole plan up and come at you while you're still off balance." Her fingers tightened weakly on his. "Promise me you'll be ready for that. Promise me you'll be smarter than your anger." Kyle's boots came fast down the basement stairs. His face was tight. "Boss. 2 of Vico's people just turned onto the row. We've got them. They won't be reporting to anyone. But that's the problem." He held up a phone. "Vico's gone dark. Stopped answering an hour ago. And the harbor master says 3 of Roslav's boats came in early. Tonight. Off the manifest." He swallowed. "He's not waiting for the wedding anymore. Boss, he knows something's wrong. He's moving the whole thing now." They took her to the North Safe House. And there, against every objection, against Corin's face and Sabela's hands and Kale's blunt insistence that she should be unconscious in a bed, Myrela Sarn refused to lie down until the family knew everything she knew. "You can bury me after," she said, and hauled herself upright on the safe house table. "But right now, I am the only person alive who has read the whole map, and if you walk into this blind, Vico wins even dead." So, they spread it out. The photographs, the manifests she'd photographed page by page over 5 weeks. The drive Seal's man opened in 10 minutes because Morella had encrypted it to unlock for exactly one family and no one else. And the picture that came together on that table was worse than any of them had feared. Vico had not simply agreed to kill Corin. He had sold Damek Roslov the entire body of the Vizari house, the warehouse codes, the shipping routes, the names of every captain, the location of the Northern Armory, and every safe address the family kept. The wedding was only ever going to be the starting gun. Roslav's men would have taken the water before the guests finished screaming. She walked them through it, piece by piece, and it was the thoroughness of it that turned Sabela's stomach, not the treachery so much as the patience. Vico had been at this the better part of a year. There were dates going back to the previous autumn. There were payments broken into pieces, small enough to hide inside the legitimate books, laundered through a shell company that carried the name of the very cannery Morella had gutted fish in. There were the shift rotations of Corin's own bodyguards, annotated in Vico's neat, familiar hand, noting beside each name which man could be bought and which would simply have to be buried. He had drawn up a list of the loyal and marked them for death the way a farmer marks stock for slaughter. Cale went very white, reading his own name on it. Third from the top. "He does the handoff himself," Mirela said, one finger on a grainy photograph of a long, low building at the edge of the black water. Blackreach Wharf. Roslav won't hand a city to a middleman on trust. He'll want Vico there, in person, to walk him through the codes before he pays. That's the 1 hour Vico is exposed. That's the only hour he's away from your men and standing in a room with the man he betrayed you for. She looked up. And even ruined, she had the flat, clear eyes of someone who had planned this 100 sleepless nights. You don't wait for him to come to you. You let him think the sale is still on, and you are already inside Blackreach when he walks in to close it. "And if he changes the meat?" Kyle asked. "A man like Vico doesn't keep to a schedule when he's spooked. He can't change it," Mirela said. "Roslav sails to a tide, not a clock. Blackreach is the only wharf on his whole stretch deep enough to land his boats at the low water tonight. And the low water is the low water. Vico can move the hour. He cannot move the moon." She tapped the photograph once more, harder. "This is the ground he chose because he was sure it was his. Take it away from him before he arrives, and it becomes the ground he dies on." Corin looked at her for a long moment, and something like awe moved beneath the grief in his face. "You should have been running families. I was too busy keeping one alive," she answered. Farron looked at the girl bent over the table, spending the last of herself to hand his son a war he could win. And he looked at his son drinking in every word, and he felt the years fall off him. He crossed to the safe in the safe house wall and worked the old combination, his own a number. Vico had never known and took out a thing he had sworn, the year Doran Sarn died, that he would never touch again. His fingers knew the weight of it before his eyes confirmed it. Some things the hands never forget, however hard a man wishes they would. He laid the weapon down on the table, beside the map. Sabela's breath caught. She knew what it meant. He had not carried it in 15 years. He had promised her over Doran Sarn's grave that he was done being the kind of man who needed it. "I made a promise to your father the day he died," Ferran said to Mirella, and his old hands were perfectly steady on the steel. "That this house would stand between his blood and any harm, for as long as one of us was breathing. I was 15 years late keeping it. I am not going to be late twice." He looked at his son. "Vico grew up in my house, so I will be the one to close the account. That much I owe the man on that coin." Mirella looked at the old Don with his dead friend's promise finally back in his hand, and something passed between them that needed no words. The daughter of the man who had died for him, and the man who had let her fall, meeting at last across 15 years with nothing owed anymore and nothing pretended. "He'd have liked you," she said quietly. "My father. He always said the measure of a man was what he did when the bill finally came due." Farron's jaw worked. "Then, let me pay it," he said. Corin gripped his father's shoulder. The old signal, the one thing that had never changed between them. And then he turned to Kyle, and the plan became orders, and the orders became motion, and the safe house emptied of everyone who could hold a weapon. Mirella caught Corin's sleeve at the door. For 1 second the strategist was gone, and there was only a frightened woman who had spent everything and had nothing left to buy his safety with. "Come back," she said. "I didn't do all this to plan another funeral. Come back to me. That's an order, and I've earned the right to give you exactly one." "One," Corin agreed, and pressed his mouth to her forehead and was gone into the dark toward Blackreach, leaving his wounded wife and his mother behind a bolted door, while out on the black water, Damek Roslav's boats were already rolling in to buy a kingdom that was no longer for sale. Blackreach Wharf smelled of tar and dead water and cold iron. The rain had stopped, and a low sea fog had come up in its place, so that the sodium lamps floated in the murk like drowned moons, and a man could not see 30 feet in any direction. Corin Vasari liked that. Fog is a great leveler. Fog does not care whose family has held the water for 30 years. They were inside the long warehouse an hour before Roslav's boats touched the pilings. Corin, Kale, 8 men whose loyalty predated the rot, and one old Don who moved through the dark like he had never stopped. They took the high catwalks and the blind corners Marilla had marked in grease pencil on a photograph, and they killed the 2 sentries Vico had posted so quietly that the fog swallowed both without a ripple. Corin set his men into the positions the girl had drawn for them. 2 on the north catwalk, with a clean line down onto the center floor. 2 at the seaward doors to cut the boats off from the water, Kyle tucked low behind the stacked crates by the breaker panel, and Farron against every argument Corin could mount. Teen the deep shadow nearest the killing ground, because the old man had refused any other place. "You put me where I can reach him," Farron had said, and that had ended it. They settled into the cold and the drip and the dark, and they waited, and Corin discovered that the waiting was the hardest fighting he had ever done. Every minute of it, stretched thin over the image of Marilla Gray on a safe house cot, and his mother sealed into that safe house beside her, and the whole of it balanced on a map drawn in grease pencil by a dying woman's hand. Then they let the trap belong to the men who thought they had built it. Vico came in first, because a traitor always arrives early to a betrayal. He walked into his own warehouse with a tablet full of stolen codes under his arm and a bottle of something to celebrate with, whistling, at ease, a man an hour away from being rich beyond counting. Behind him, minutes later came Damek Roslav, heavy, unhurried, flanked by a dozen of his own guns, and the 2 of them met in the pool of light in the center of the floor and shook hands over the sale of the Vasari house. Corin watched from the dark as Vico thumbed the tablet awake and began to read the codes aloud, the codes to Corin's warehouses, Corin's roots, Corin's armory, the accumulated secrets of 3 Vasari generations, recited into a rival's ear like items off a grocery list. Roslav's men relaxed by degrees, lowering their guns, lighting cigarettes, a dozen hard men going soft with the certainty of easy money. In the black, beside his son, Farron's breathing slowed and evened the way a marksman's does before the shot, and then Vico laughed his warm, brotherly laugh and said the thing that ended him. "To family," Vico said, raising the bottle. Corin always said blood was everything. "Let's drink to how much his is about to be worth." "Drink to it," said a voice out of the fog, and every lamp in Blackreach went black at once. Kyle had found the breaker exactly where the girl's map said it would be. What happened in that darkness was fast and total, and did not resemble a fair fight, because Corin Vasari had not come to Blackreach for a fair fight. He had come for a reckoning. Roslav's men, blind and screaming in a building they didn't know, fired at muzzle flashes and hit each other. Corin's men, who had memorized the floor and the light, moved through them like a tide going out. Corin heard it more, then saw it. The wet cough of Kale's suppressed shotgun, the short controlled bursts from the catwalk, a man shout ending abruptly in the dark. Boots slipping on concrete, gone slick, first with the fog's condensation and then with worse. He put his own shoulder to the work and did not let himself feel any of it. That would come later, in the gray hours, the way it always did. He was a Vasari on Vasari ground, and the ground fought for him. When the emergency lamp stuttered back on 2 minutes later, the geography of the room had entirely changed. Roslav's dozen were down or disarmed. Damek Roslav himself was on his knees, with Kale's shotgun at the back of his skull, wheezing, the kingdom he'd bought slipping through his fat fingers. And Vico stood alone in the center of the floor, the bottle shattered at his feet, turning and turning, looking for a brother in a room full of the brothers' guns. He found Corin, and then worse, he found Farron. Vico's voice cracked on the old word. "Farran, whatever they've told you." "They told me the truth," Farran said, and stepped into the light with the gun he had not carried in 15 years held low and easy in his old hand. I raised you at my own table, I buried your father and I called you my own. And you were going to let them cut my son down in a room full of flowers, with me standing beside him, too old and too slow to stop it. His face did not move. Do you know how I found out, Vico? A girl you had never met bled out in a gutter to warn two beggars. She spent her father's whole life keeping a secret so my son could be loved for he, and then she spent her own blood keeping him alive. She is worth 1,000 of you, and she is the reason you did not get away with this. Farran, please. Vico's hands came up. Please, we're family. Family. Farran tasted the word and found it rotten. I taught you to shave in my own bathroom. I paid for your mother's headstone. When you were 12, and newly fatherless, and afraid of the dark, I sat on the edge of your bed until you slept, because there was no one else left to do it. The gun did not waver. And you looked at every year of that, every single year, and you decided it was worth less than what Damek Roslav could wire to an account on some island. We were family, Farran said. You sold that for a warehouse. And the old Don, who had promised a dying man in the rain that he was done with killing, kept a different promise instead. The gun came up. It barked once in the fog, and the sound of it rolled out over the black water and came back, and Vico folded down onto the wet concrete without another word and lay still, and it was done. Farran lowered the gun. His hand did not shake until it was over. Then it shook. Sabela was not there to see it, and Farran was glad of that. He had promised her, over a grave in the rain, that the man who needed this weapon had been buried alongside his friend. He had just dug that man back up. He would answer to her for it later, and he would do it gladly because the only alternative had been a son in a box. Load them, Corin told Kale, his voice hollow and level. All of them. And take Roslav's phone. He crouched in front of the wheezing rival and took his chin the way one might a child's. You're going to live, Damek? You're going to get on your boat and go home and tell every family on this coast what Blackreach cost you. That's the only reason you're breathing. Roslav's throat worked. Whatever he had expected of the Vasari boy, it had not been mercy, and the mercy frightened him worse than a bullet would have, because mercy meant Corin was certain enough of his own strength to let an enemy live and carry the story home. You're making a mistake, Roslav rasped. I'm making an advertisement, Corin said, and rose, and turned his back on the man to show the whole fog-wet room exactly how little he feared him. And that was when Kale's radio crackled, the man they'd left watching the North safe house, his voice tight and wrong. Boss, we've got a problem. One of Roslav's boats broke off before you cut the lights. It didn't come to Blackreach. A burst of static. It's landing at the North safe house. Vico sold them every safe address we've got. They know exactly where the women are, right now. The safe house had a bolted door, and a mother and a wounded girl, and one guard, and the guard went down in the first 30 seconds. Sabela heard it, the crunch of a boat's hull on the shingle, the shout cut short, the heavy quiet, that means a man is no longer standing. And 30 years of being a Don's wife told her exactly what it was. She had a pistol Sale had left her, and hands that had not fired one in decades. And she put her body between the bolted door and the cot where Mirella lay, and she prepared calmly, the way her husband had taught her, to die well. 40 years she had lived at the center of this life, and never once fired a shot in it. That had always been the men's work, and she had been content to rule the parts of the empire that ran on other kinds of steel. But she had watched her husband check a weapon 10,000 times, and her hands remembered what her heart had never had to do. She thumbed the safety off. She steadied her breathing. She thought, absurdly, of the silver-inked seating chart and of how close she had come to losing everything she had to a boy she had once tucked into bed. But Marilla Sarn had already dragged herself off the cot. "Give me the gun," Marilla breathed. She was gray. She was shaking. She had no business being upright, but her eyes were flat and clear, and her voice had the cold competence of a woman who had spent 5 weeks planning around exactly this. "Sabela, listen to me. They'll expect two frightened women behind the door. They'll come through it fast and stupid. Get behind the stove and stay down and let them think there's no one but you." She braced herself against the doorframe, sighting on the black rectangle of the entry, with a steadiness that cost her everything she had left. "I did not keep your son alive to lose his mother. In the last hour, the door came in." Two men, fast and stupid, exactly as she'd said. Myrila did not miss. She had never fired a weapon in anger in her life, but she had planned this room the way she planned everything. The angles, the light, the single doorway, and the first man dropped in the frame and the second tripped on him. And by the time he'd cleared the body, Sabela had come up from behind the stove with her own gun in both hands and finished what the girl had started. Then it was quiet, and it was over, and the two women stood in the sudden dark, breathing hard, alive. For a moment neither of them could quite believe the silence. Sabela's ears rang. The pistol was hot in her hands, and her arms had begun, now that it was finished, to shake so hard she had to set it down on the stovetop. Myrella slid down the doorframe by inches, the last of her strength going out of her like water from a cracked jug. And it was that, the sight of the girl finally letting herself fall, that broke the spell and sent Sabela across the room at a run. Sabela crossed the room and caught Myrila as the girl's legs finally gave out, and lowered her gently to the floor and held Doran Sarn's daughter against her chest the way she had not held anyone since her son was small. "You put yourself in front of that door for me," Sabela said, and her voice broke clean in half. "You are half dead, and you did it anyway, for an old woman who came down that hill to destroy you." She pressed her lips to the girl's hair. "It was us, child, on the row, the beggars you fed, the scarf, the broth, the last coin. It was Farron and me. We came to catch you in a lie, and instead, you fed us, and warned us, and now you've saved my life with a hole in your side." She was weeping openly, now, this woman, who had not wept in front of anyone in 40 years. "There is no lie in you, there never was. And I will spend whatever I have left making sure this family gives back to you 100-fold what it took from your father." Myrella's hand found the old woman's and held it. "I didn't do it to be paid back," she whispered. "I did it because he loves you, and I love him. And that's all I ever wanted, my father's coin to buy." Sabela held her tighter and rocked her the way you rock a child, and thought that in all her long years of reading the true face beneath the false one, she had never in her life been so completely, so gratefully wrong about a person. When Corin came through that broken door 20 minutes later, Farron a step behind him, both of them still smelling of fog and gunpowder, he found his mother on the floor of a safe house cradling his wounded wife. Both of them alive, both of them holding on, and Damek Roslav's men dead in the doorway they'd meant to come through. He crossed the room and gathered both women into his arms at once. The woman who bore him and the woman who'd bled for him, and for a long time none of the four of them said anything at all, because some things don't need saying once you've all lived through the same night. Farron stood a little apart, the way men of his making do, until Morella put out one bloodied hand toward him, not to be helped up, but simply to be held, and the old Don crossed the room and took it in both of his, and knelt, this man who knelt for no one, on the floor of a shot-up safe-house before the daughter of his oldest debt. "Your father asked me if I was hurt," Farron said, his voice wrecked past repair, with the last breath in his body. "And I have spent 15 years unable to answer him." He pressed her hand to his forehead. "Tell him, when you dream of him. Tell him his Dawn finally kept his word. Tell him the girl came home. The wedding," Mirala finally mumbled into his shoulder, exhausted past sense, "was still cancelled though, technically. You cancelled it in front of everyone." "Then we'll have a new one," Corin said. "A real one. No merger, no 200 strangers, no man at my shoulder. I have to watch." He pulled back and looked at her, this ruined, impossible woman his whole family now owed its life to. "You won't be marrying into the Vasari house, Mirela. You already are it. You have been since your father stepped in front of that blade. We just took 15 years and one very stupid disguise to see it. They held it in the spring, in the garden, behind Ashcombe Hill, when Myrilla could finally walk the length of it without the cane. It was nothing like the white circus that had been built to hide a murder. There were maybe 40 people, all of them real. The caretaker from the church basement, the cannery women who had stood beside her in the soup line before they ever knew her name, and a boy named Tam in a jacket a size too big, who had run the right way that night on the shoreline and lived, and who would never go hungry again. Not while a single Vasari still stood. Farron had seen to that personally. He had a great deal of catching up to do. He had found the church caretaker a real pension and a warm apartment. He had put money, quietly and without a name attached to it, into the shelter on Ash Lane and the soup kitchen at the shuttered church, so that the next Doran Sarn's daughter to fall through the floor of the city might land somewhere a little softer than his had. He did none of it for thanks. He did it because a man who has been shown at 70 exactly how far he has drifted from the promises of his youth will spend whatever years remain to him trying to drift back. Damek Roslov never crossed the water again. The story of Blackreach did what Corin knew it would. By summer, no family on the coast would take a meeting within a mile of Vasari ground, and the harbor was quieter and safer than it had been in a generation. But that is not the part the old people talk about. On the nights they talk about it at all. They talk about the coin. Farron gave it back to Myrilla on the morning of the wedding. Doran Sarn's coin. The twin herons worn smooth. The 2 hand-cut letters, except that overnight he'd had a jeweler add 2 letters more beneath them, so that a soldier's initials now sat above his daughter's joined on the same worn metal. You bleed for me, the old promise ran, and this house bleeds for you, forever. It had taken the Viserys 15 years, and a pair of borrowed rags to finally fully mean it. Myrilla wore it to the wedding under her dress, against her heart, where she had always worn it, except that now, for the first time in her whole life, she did not have to hide it. She stood in the spring garden in front of 40 people who loved her, and she married a man who had chosen her twice over, once not knowing who she was, and once knowing everything, and choosing harder the second time. Sabela likes to say she went down that hill to find out whether the stranger was worthy of her son. She came back up it having learned the harder thing, that the question had been backwards the whole time. The stranger had been worthy all along. It was the family that had needed proving. Corinne keeps the photographs still, not the ones of Vico and the manifests, those he burned. But the single grainy frame seal turned up months later off a traffic camera on Marrow Row. 2 filthy old people on an overturned crate, and a thin young woman kneeling in the rain in front of them, pressing a bowl of broth into a beggar's hands. He keeps it framed on his desk when men come to do business with the Vasari house and ask, as men always do, about the strange old photograph of the poor. He tells them it is the most expensive thing he owns. He never explains it. They never understand. Myrilla always does. They put on the rags of the poorest people in their city to expose a liar, and they found instead the one person alive who would empty her pockets and her past and her own blood to keep their family breathing, and never once ask to be thanked for it. That is not how you catch a gold digger. That is how, if you are very lucky and very late, you find your way back to the people you were always supposed to protect. If this one got to you, the beggars, the coin, the girl who gave away her last of everything, do the small thing that helps these stories reach more people. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more slow burn loyalty and quiet strength that outlasts every loud man in the room. And share this with someone who needs to hear that the people who love us most are usually the ones asking for the least. And tell me down in the comments, the moment you knew Myrilla was the real thing. Was it the last coin or the coin around her neck? I'll see you in the next one.